Good morning. So, we will begin with a reading of David Fincher's Seven, a 1995 movie starring Morgan Freeman, Brad Pitt and Gwyneth Paltrow, and of course, Kevin Spacey. So, we know how important he is. This is the tagline of Seven, Seven Deadly Sins, 7 Ways to Die. Okay, so, this is the tagline, and then you have all those 7 deadly sins enlisted on the poster. So, we are going to read 7 in particular with reference to semiotics, signs, symbols and codes, the enigmatic code and the cultural code. And we have already looked at these codes in some detail, what is meant by the enigmatic code and what is a cultural code. So, can you just refresh what we were doing in the last class? What is enigmatic code? We looked at the picture of vertigo. And 2 women, James Stewart flanked by 2 poses and 2 looks rather of Kim Novak, the dark hair, the blonde. Okay. So, I said this is a good example of the enigmatic code. What were we talking about?
Setting a puzzle, something which for the audience or viewer should be solved, or just
some sort of an uncertainty, you don't know what's going to happen.
Good. So, enigmatic code is all about setting a puzzle. So, 7 falls in the category of puzzle cinema. It is a cultural category also, cultural code, we will see why. These horrifying images in the title, in the opening credit sequence of 7 mutilated fingers of a dead body. So, what is 7? 7, also pay attention to the way the producers and the filmmakers, the makers of 7 wrote the title, designed the title very enigmatically with number 7 as well inserted. So, giving it an economy of expression as well as conveying a certain kind of sign, a symbol to it. So, 7 is a study in sin. If you ask us what is 7 all about, what is the movie all about, 7 is a study in sin. As someone was rightly pointing out just now, it is a thriller, it is a detective movie, the heroes are detectives as played by Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt. It is a crime movie, after all it is a movie where there is a killer at large, a serial killer at large. So, it is a crime movie, it is a detective movie. At some level it is also a film noir. We have been talking about film noir exploring the dark undertones of someone's personality. So, it is a noir, it is also a horror. And what kind of horror? There is a genre of horror called the body horror. It is believed that in modern times, in our contemporary times, the body is no longer sacred. It can be violated by someone at any time. So, it could be during wars, it could be a mugging, it could be anything, and here in 7 you have a serial killer who delights in violating bodies. Just an aside, David Cronenberg, the Canadian filmmaker, is a master in body horror. If you have watched his movies like, can you give me some example? Eastern Promises or Videodrome, Existence, Crash, okay. All these movies are studies in body horror. So, body horror looks at with fascination at mutilated bodies, okay. That is where horror comes from. So, we know how 7 begins and how horribly it ends, okay, with mutilated bodies, body of someone you know. Okay. So, that is what we mean by body horror. The title or number 7 is an index, it acts as an index. Index we know points out at something. but points out at what. Just number 7 can tell you that God took 7 days to create the world. So, 7 is an important number. We also talk about 7 pillars of wisdom symbolically. We also talk about 7 wonders of the world, 7 cardinal virtues, 7 sins, 7 colors of the rainbow, and of course, Detective Somerset in the movie has 7 days to go before his final retirement. So, this would perhaps be of interest to you that in spite of having a very huge star like Brad Pitt and a reasonably big star like Morgan Freeman in the movie, 7 initially did not market itself as a Brad Pitt movie. What did it market itself as? Just the title, The Study in Sin, because the makers felt this in the Western world, this is catchy enough, this is a marketable enough commodity. So, they need not. So, I was reading some reviews of the movie, all very, the movie was received extremely well. Okay. It has survived the test of time, it is a canonical movie. So, initially when it was released, people wondered that why, in spite of having Brad Pitt, the makers did not bother to put Brad Pitt on the posters and market it that way. Why 7? Because of the fascination of the Western world with the idea of sin. So, I draw your attention to the DVD cover. Okay. You can look at it, no Brad Pitt, no Gwyneth, only 7. Okay. And that is the way the DVD has been released. Look at this, the inside jacket of DVD, of this DVD, and what does it appear to you like? Looks like a book. Yeah, it looks like a book, cover of a book. And why are books so important in the movie? Collection of notebooks, exactly. So, notebooks and books, there is a very integral, very vital scene in the movie which takes place in the library. Morgan Freeman trying to decipher the meaning of these murders. Okay, and we know what book he is reading. So, we will come to that. So, Morgan Freeman or Somerset, as his character is called, he also refers to 7 slain children in Dante's Purgatory. Purgatory is a part in Dante's Divine Comedy. Of course, now that we know the movie, we know it is about 7 days in 7 sins in 7 days. So, I asked you to watch the movie. How does it begin? I am sorry I can't show you the movie or the clipping here right now, but how does it begin?
He'll be getting ready. We'll put him
Yeah,
on
he's
his
getting-
Freeman's day start.
A regular work day in Morgan Freeman's life. How does it begin? He is putting on his clothes. Okay, he is very meticulously dressing up. Okay. What does it tell you about? So, those are little clues and signs about his character. What do they tell you about? He is very methodical. He is he likes to be prepared. He is very thorough, a great brain. That is how one of his superiors referred to him, that do not retire so soon. I mean, he wants to retire, and they say you are one of the greatest brains here. Okay. We know, and there is just 7 days to go. So, Morgan Freeman, after all, a great actor, but in 1995 we have had glimpses of his greatness in films such as Driving Miss Daisy. It was an Oscar winning movie, Shawshank Redemption, and also he was Robin Hood's partner in Kevin Costner's The Prince of Thieves. So, we knew Morgan Freeman, the movie capitalizes on the Morgan Freeman persona, and I am not talking about his more contemporary movies like the Dark Knight series. All these happened later, after 7, but before 7 we had Shawshank Redemption, we had Driving Miss Daisy, we had the Prince of Thieves. And what kind of character did he specialize in playing? Wise person, the wise guy. Okay, the not wise guy as in as a pejorative, but wise guy in a very positive way. He is a person who has wisdom, who the hero can depend on. Okay. So, therefore, if the hero is Brad Pitt, the young, good looking, hunky hero, you have the older, wiser Morgan Freeman. The movie has, and let me stress it very emphatically, that movie has no interest in the color of his skin. Seven is not about racism at all. It is just that we have a black actor doing a great role, a great job of it. Otherwise, there is no importance as such to his race, to the color of his skin. Okay. Opening scene, key connotations. We have been looking at connotations and denotations, remember? So, connotations. When the movie opens and we know that Morgan Freeman very meticulously getting dressed up, getting ready for the day, we see road signs at the beginning, signs. So, film's fascination, preoccupation with science continues. David Fincher is a maker who is fascinated by the system of science, zodiac. The external sound. Now, which city is it set in?
Doesn't mention anywhere.
Doesn't mention. It's just any metropolis. Okay, and what happens in metropolises according to 7? Crime. Okay. So, when we are talking about film noir the other day, we all talked about, we all agreed that film noir is more often than not set in big cities, sometimes even in suburbs and sometimes even in rural areas, like The Postman Always Rings Twice, but not always. Okay. So, set in metropolis, unnamed metropolis, could be any city. The city sounds at the beginning. So, we have cars honking, neighbors making some kind of sounds, etc., etc. And how, notice how the filmmaker contrasts those external sounds with Somerset's internal world, the inner space of Somerset's being. So, it is very calm, it is very quiet. While he lives in calmness and quietude, you hear all these city noises outside. What are those signs? What is the filmmaker trying to tell you here? In spite of the chaos outside, he is still able to find some moments of peace within himself. That is the kind of character, because see, he is a world weary character. We recognize that. He has seen too much. He is sick of the crimes that he has been witnessing throughout his professional life, but still he has been able to retain some semblance of sanity. That is because it comes from within, the calmness comes from within. That is an important feature of Morgan Freeman's character in 7, and this is completely juxtaposed with always on the edge hero Brad Pitt. Okay. So, we also see in the beginning opening sequence the chess set in the foreground, that tells you a lot about, I mean, a man who is very who is quite an expert in the game of chess. Okay. He is an intellectual. We are given certain signs and clues. Okay. It may not necessarily be so, but the filmmakers what they do to emphasize on someone's mind, they surround the room with books perhaps. They surround the room with a so called intellectual game like a set of chess. Then you have metronome, remember metronome in the beginning of the movie. What does he do? He sets the metronome and excludes the sounds which are taking place outside. So, metronome dissolves sort of the sounds that are emanating from the outside. What does it tell you about Somerset? He is someone who can take control of things, okay, if he wants to, and that is his character, that is the way his character is established. At one point when the first murder occurs and Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman visit the scene of crime, and Brad Pitt never stops talking, there is always a hubbub. Yep. And then Somerset at one point can't take it anymore and he says, will you please be quiet. Okay. He knows he cannot control everything, but things that he can control, he does control, and calm and peace is something that he requires. So, at one level, Seven's hero can also be Morgan Freeman, because he is the most identifiable character in the movie. Opening credit, wonderfully done. Okay, if you haven't watched the movie, watch it again and just watch the first 10 and the last 10 minutes of the movie. You will get a hang of it. So, opening credit is a montage. You know montage? Quick cutting between two different or a couple of different acts going on. So, you have Doe, and who is Doe? John Doe, the serial killer. We do not see his face for a very long time. A major star playing John Doe, and we do not get to see him for a very long period of time. Okay, that is interesting. Now, Doe's work, and when it goes on, we see close-ups of Doe's hands and his handiwork. So, writings on the notebook, stitching bodies, peeling off skin from his fingers so that not to leave fingerprints, yeah, using scissors. So, things which require dexterous use of hands. So, therefore, at the in the beginning of the movie we saw a very close up shot of hands, mutilated fingers, but hands are important. And Doe's work is accompanied by the 9-inch nails. The soundtrack is Closer. You take me closer to God, that is the closing line of that song, and which is important because 9-inch nails were fascinated with another serial killer, Charles Manson. Okay. And initially this soundtrack was recorded in Charles Manson's house. So, 9-inch nails, the group, was extremely close to a notorious real life serial killer, Charles Manson. Somerset's world, on the other hand, is contrasted with Doe's. Now, why Doe and why Somerset? Why are we comparing the two? One is an out and out good guy.
They are both very methodical characters.
Both extremely methodical, okay, both extremely intellectual. Brad Pitt, Mill's character, he does not come anywhere close to these people. Okay. Intellectually, he is just not there. Okay. So, the entire mind game is between Somerset and John Doe. Therefore, it is interesting to note that John Doe's handiwork is matched with 9-inch nails soundtrack, cacophonic sound, okay, lots of sounds, remixes, lots of number of sounds mixed up there, whereas Morgan's song is Bach's air on a G string. So, it is all about calmness, quietude, stability. So, the enigmatic code that we were looking at, what is 7? What is so important about the title number 7? And how is the myth of the 7 deadly sins used in plot development? If you remember, the killer at one point surrenders himself. After which murder?
Right.
Yeah, after the 5th murder. And David Fincher says that when he first read the script, he thought, okay, the movie is going to end now. Okay, a fifth murder, and perhaps there won't be any 2 more murders. It's just that, but we know there are 2 more murders to come. Okay. It doesn't really happen. So the you know, in a crime movie, you have certain expectations. The other way, while discussing genres, we were talking about we expect certain things, certain conventions from a genre. Rom-com and an action movie, all these movies evoke certain expectations. A crime movie, a murder movie evokes certain kind of expectations. That means that we expect the policeman, after all Brad Pitt is our hero. So, we expect him to catch the killer. It does not happen, he surrenders himself. Okay. So, that is an enigma. The movie plays on the enigma of the conventional genre. Okay. So, the similarities between, point of similarities between Somerset and John Doe, both painstaking, thorough, professional and intellectual. They take great pride in their professionalism. Interestingly, they have the same world view. They know that civilization is beyond redemption. But while Morgan Freeman looks at the world with kindness and compassion, John Doe's character is more furious. He wants to avenge himself. Okay. He cannot tolerate other people's weaknesses, impatience with imperfections. So, Somerset tolerates, Doe is intolerant. And of course, the movie also plays on the name John Doe. Is this his real name? But his real name is Jonathan in the movie. John Doe is an American everyman, the regular average guy. Okay. So, is he the regular average guy? That is another enigmatic code the movie is interested in. Why this name? Now, the trope of an older black cop and younger white cop, we have already seen Lethal Weapon. Okay. And how does 7 differ from Lethal Weapon? Danny Glover, Mel Gibson. What's the relationship between them?
They are more like friends.
Okay. But here there are hierarchies. The senior and more experienced, more intelligent cop on the verge of retirement, and the rookie who is all brawn and hardly any brains. So, that dichotomy is brought out very early on in the movie. It plays on the genre of buddy movie, that friends, and both Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt characters, they act as foils to each other. So, look at their initial interaction. It begins on a note of hostility. They do not like each other, they do not want to work with each other. They dress very differently. One is methodical, as we have already seen, another is quite sloppy. Manner of speaking, Morgan Freeman very calm, very measured, very poised. Brad Pitt on the other hand cannot stop talking, the chatterbox, and most of the time it does not make much sense. Okay. The library scene gives the game away, the difference between the 2 men, emphasizes the difference between the 2 men very, very prominently, where Morgan Freeman is able to decipher quotes from Dante's Purgatory. And what does Brad Pitt do? He is and he also reads cliff notes in order to understand Dante's Purgatory. So, that is the difference between their intellectual prowess. So, when we talk about study in binaries, it cannot get better than that, but I mean we have been talking about chalk and cheese, and that is a trope of buddy movies. Again, Lethal Weapon also plays on these binaries. Brains and brawn, a relationship that begins in hostility but ends up in mutual respect.